The crisp autumn air drifted through the open kitchen window as Helen Crawford, a 68-year-old widow, carefully arranged fresh flowers in a crystal vase. Her home, nestled in a peaceful suburb outside Portland, had been her sanctuary for more than 30 years. Every corner held memories of birthdays, Christmas mornings, and quiet evenings spent with her late husband, Daniel. She had just poured herself a cup of tea when the front door opened without a knock. Her son, Adam Crawford, walked in first, his shoulders stiff and his face unusually pale. Close behind him came his wife, Melissa, dressed in expensive clothes that looked newer than anything Helen had bought for herself in years. Melissa carried a leather folder under one arm and wore the confident smile of someone expecting complete obedience. Without greeting her mother-in-law, Melissa laid several papers across the granite countertop. "You need to take care of this," she said flatly. Helen adjusted her glasses and looked down. The top page displayed a frightening figure, $500,000. She slowly lifted her eyes. "What exactly am I looking at?" "Our debt," Melissa answered without hesitation. "You have enough money to solve it, so that's what you're going to do." The words settled over the room like heavy fog. Adam shifted awkwardly beside his wife but remained silent. He couldn't even meet his mother's gaze. Helen folded her hands calmly. "I know you've struggled financially," she said, "but $500,000 isn't something anyone simply hands over." Melissa crossed her arms. "It is when family is involved." Helen searched her son's face, hoping he would finally speak. Instead, Adam quietly muttered, "Mom, we really need your help." She noticed he never once said the debt was his responsibility. Melissa leaned closer. "We're giving you 3 days. If the money isn't transferred by Friday, don't expect to be part of our family anymore." For several long seconds, no one moved. Helen had survived cancer, buried the love of her life, and rebuilt her life from unimaginable grief. Yet somehow, hearing her own family reduce their relationship to a financial transaction hurt more than anything she'd ever experienced. She remembered every sacrifice she'd made. She had paid Adam's college tuition, covered the down payment on his first home, helped buy his first car, watched their children whenever they wanted vacations, paid school fees, medical bills, even monthly expenses they insisted were temporary. Temporary had quietly become permanent. Melissa seemed convinced another check would solve everything again. Helen inhaled slowly. "If money is the only reason I'm considered family," she said softly, "then perhaps I never truly belonged." Melissa rolled her eyes. "So that's a no?" Helen reached for her purse hanging beside the back door. "I didn't say yes." She picked up her car keys. "I said I need 3 days." Melissa smiled, believing she'd won. Smart decision. Adam finally looked relieved. Neither of them noticed the quiet determination behind Helen's gentle expression. She walked outside without another word. Instead of driving aimlessly to clear her thoughts, Helen headed directly downtown. The first stop was her local bank. For nearly 25 years, she'd worked with the same branch manager, Oliver Grant, who greeted her warmly. "Helen, it's good to see you." She smiled politely. "I need to make several important changes today." Within the hour, every authorization allowing Adam access during emergencies had been revoked. Joint permissions disappeared. Backup signatures were removed. Online passwords were changed. Security questions updated. Helen didn't rush. Every signature felt less like revenge and more like reclaiming ownership of the life she'd spent decades building. When the paperwork was complete, Oliver looked concerned. "Everything all right?" Helen offered a small smile. "It will be." Leaving the bank, she drove to a locksmith instead of going home. She purchased 3 high-security deadbolts. Then she stopped at a local office supply store. She bought folders, labels, storage boxes, and a notebook. If this chapter of her life was ending, she intended to organize it properly. By late afternoon, she returned home. The house was empty. Adam and Melissa were nowhere to be found. Perhaps they were already celebrating the fortune they expected to receive. Helen quietly carried every purchase inside. She changed the front door lock herself. The steady rhythm of the screwdriver strangely soothed her racing thoughts. After finishing, she brewed another pot of tea and sat at the dining table. Her phone vibrated. "Melissa, we expect confirmation before noon Friday. Don't disappoint us." Helen stared at the message, then she locked the screen without replying. She opened the notebook she'd just purchased and carefully wrote one sentence across the first page. Day 1. Today I stopped financing people who forgot how to love me. She closed the notebook, looked around the peaceful house she'd earned through decades of hard work, and realized something surprising. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. Helen woke before sunrise on Wednesday morning. Instead of the anxiety she had expected, she felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the antique clock her husband had restored years earlier. She made breakfast for one, opened the curtains, and watched golden light spill across her backyard. It occurred to her that she had spent so many years solving other people's crises that she'd forgotten what peace felt like. After breakfast, she opened her laptop. One by one, she reviewed every recurring payment linked to Adam and Melissa: monthly rent assistance, luxury SUV lease payments, private school tuition for the grandchildren, streaming subscriptions, gym memberships, their premium phone plan, an allowance she had quietly deposited into Adam's account every month until things improved. Things had never improved. Each payment disappeared with a single click. Helen wasn't taking anything from them. She was simply refusing to continue carrying responsibilities that had never been hers. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair and quietly whispered, "No more." Late that morning, she walked through the house with fresh eyes. The upstairs study had once belonged to Daniel. After his passing, it became Helen's reading room, filled with family photographs, handmade quilts, and treasured keepsakes, until Melissa decided it would make a better home office without asking permission. Over time, Helen's belongings had been boxed up and pushed into the basement, while expensive designer furniture replaced decades of family history. Standing in the doorway now, Helen felt sadness, but not anger. She found several empty storage boxes in the garage and began packing Melissa's belongings carefully. Every picture frame was wrapped, every decorative item protected, every file placed neatly into labeled cartons. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was thrown away. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. By lunchtime, the room looked like Daniel's study once again. Helen carried one of his old leather chairs back upstairs and placed it beside the window overlooking the garden. She smiled. "Welcome home," she whispered. Her peaceful afternoon ended when her phone buzzed repeatedly. Melissa. Ignored Adam. Ignored. Another message arrived. "Melissa, did you send the transfer yet?" A minute later, Melissa, "Answer me." Then another, Melissa, "We're serious." Helen placed the phone face down and continued reading her novel. Around 3 o'clock, she decided to stop by the neighborhood grocery store. The owner, Samuel Brooks, had known her family for years. After exchanging pleasantries, Helen quietly explained, "I need a small favor." Samuel listened carefully. "If Adam or Melissa attempt to charge groceries to my account, please decline them. I'll only cover purchases I make personally." Samuel nodded without hesitation. "I understand." There were no embarrassing questions, no gossip, just quiet respect. Helen thanked him and headed home. For the first time in years, she bought only what she wanted: fresh vegetables, homemade bread, tea flowers. She realized how much of her shopping had revolved around everyone else's demands. Back home, she settled into the garden with another cup of tea. Birds hopped across the lawn while a cool breeze carried the scent of roses. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she glanced at the screen. "Adam calling." She answered. "Hello." His voice sounded nervous. "Mom, Melissa says you haven't responded." "I know. Are you sending the money?" Helen paused. "Adam, do you know how much I've already given you over the last 15 years? Silence. I do. She had calculated everything that morning: college tuition, wedding expenses, medical bills, business investments, credit card bailouts, car repairs, vacations. Emergency loans that were never repaid. The total had shocked even her. It exceeded $1 million. "Do you remember paying any of it back?" she asked gently. Adam swallowed. "No, I never expected repayment. Another long silence. But I did expect gratitude. He didn't know what to say. Finally, he muttered, "Melissa thinks we're family." Helen closed her eyes. Family doesn't issue invoices for love. She ended the call before he could answer. That evening, Helen reviewed her estate planning documents. For years, Adam had been listed as the primary beneficiary. Now she wasn't so sure. She scheduled an appointment with her attorney for Friday morning, not because she wanted revenge, because she wanted certainty. Her life's work deserved protection. Just before bed, another message appeared. Melissa. Remember, noon Friday. If the money isn't there, don't bother calling us again. Helen stared at the words. She wasn't angry anymore. She actually felt sorry for the woman who believed relationships could be bought. Helen set the phone on the nightstand, turned off the light, and smiled faintly in the darkness. They believed the deadline was approaching for her. They had no idea. It was their countdown that had already begun. Thursday morning arrived with gray clouds hanging over the city, but inside Helen Crawford's home, there was an unexpected sense of peace. She watered the roses along the back patio, fed the birds that gathered every morning, and enjoyed breakfast on the porch. It had been years since she'd started a day without worrying about someone else's financial emergency. Her phone, however, had a different agenda. By 9 o'clock, it had already recorded 12 missed calls, 7 from Melissa, 5 from Adam. Helen silenced the device and carried it inside. She had made her decision days ago. There was nothing left to discuss. Instead, she opened the old cedar chest in her bedroom and carefully sorted through family keepsakes. Daniel's military medals, faded photo albums, handwritten anniversary cards, and the silver pocket watch he'd carried every day for nearly 40 years. As she wrapped each treasure in soft cloth, she realized how many memories had nearly been buried beneath other people's demands. Those memories deserved better, so did she. Shortly after noon, tires screeched outside. Helen glanced through the living room window. Adam's sedan stopped abruptly in front of the house. Both he and Melissa climbed out. Slamming their doors, Melissa marched straight toward the front entrance, while Adam followed several steps behind. Helen remained exactly where she was. A loud knock echoed through the house. Then another, finally. Melissa tried the key she'd been given years earlier for emergencies. It wouldn't turn. She frowned and tried again. Still nothing. "What is this?" she shouted through the door. Helen calmly unlocked a nearby window instead of the front entrance. The locks have been changed. Melissa looked up in disbelief. "You changed the locks?" "I did." "You had no right." Helen raised an eyebrow. "It's my house." Adam stepped forward. "Mom, please, can we just talk?" "We are talking." He looked exhausted. "Our landlord called this morning." Helen said nothing. "The rent wasn't paid. I know." "The automatic transfer stopped." "Yes," Melissa interrupted angrily. "My vehicle payment bounced too." Helen folded her arms. "That tends to happen when someone else stops paying your bills." Melissa's face turned bright red. "You embarrassed us." "No," Helen replied evenly. "You embarrassed yourselves." Adam rubbed his forehead. "We thought you were just trying to prove a point." "I am." "Then you've made it." Helen looked directly at her son. "No, Adam. I've only begun." For years, she'd mistaken enabling for love. Now she finally understood the difference. Helping someone through hardship was kindness. Funding irresponsibility forever was surrender. Melissa pointed toward the house. "You owe us an explanation." Helen almost smiled. "I don't owe you anything." Adam's voice softened. "Mom, we're in real trouble." "I know. We could lose everything." Helen remembered the afternoon they'd stood in her kitchen only 2 days earlier. "Pay the money, or you're no longer family." She hadn't forgotten a single word. "You made your choice Tuesday," she said quietly. I simply accepted it. Neither of them spoke. The silence seemed heavier than any argument. Melissa suddenly stepped closer to the porch. "If we lose the house, it'll be your fault." Helen shook her head. "No. You signed the loans. You spent the money. You created the debt. Those decisions belong to you." Adam lowered his eyes. For the first time, he looked ashamed. Not angry, ashamed. The conversation ended without another word. Melissa stormed back toward the car, Furious, Adam lingered near the walkway before leaving. He looked at his mother. "I never thought you'd actually walk away." Helen answered gently. "I didn't walk away from my family. I walked away from being used." Adam climbed into the passenger seat. The car disappeared around the corner. Helen quietly closed the window. That afternoon, she drove downtown for her appointment with attorney Richard Palmer, who had handled her family's legal matters for nearly 20 years. After listening carefully, Richard removed his glasses. "Are you absolutely certain?" Helen nodded. "I've never been more certain." Together they reviewed her estate plan. Adam was no longer listed as sole beneficiary. Instead, Helen established an educational trust that would provide scholarships for children from struggling families. Richard smiled. "Your husband would have admired this decision." Helen's eyes became misty. "I hope so." She signed every document with a steady hand. Each signature felt less like ending a relationship and more like protecting everything Daniel had spent a lifetime helping her build. As she left the office later that afternoon, her phone buzzed again. This time there were 38 missed calls, voicemails, texts, apologies, excuses, promises, threats. She didn't open a single one. Driving home, Helen realized something remarkable. The fear that had controlled her for years had quietly disappeared. She no longer feared disappointing people who only remembered her when they needed money. She no longer feared being alone, because the loneliness she'd felt while constantly sacrificing herself had been far worse than the peaceful silence waiting for her at home. Tomorrow would be Friday. The deadline Melissa had confidently imposed. Neither Adam nor Melissa understood it yet, but by tomorrow afternoon, their ultimatum would belong to the past, and Helen's new life would finally begin. Friday morning arrived cool and clear, the kind of morning Helen used to spend worrying about everyone except herself. This time was different. She woke before sunrise, brewed fresh coffee, and carried the mug onto her back patio. The garden was quiet except for birds singing from the maple trees. She had slept peacefully. Inside the house, her phone rested on the kitchen counter, powered off since the previous evening. Only after breakfast did she switch it back on. Within seconds, notifications flooded the screen. 43 missed calls, 27 text messages, 9 voicemails. Most were from Melissa, the rest came from Adam. Helen skimmed only the first few messages. "Please answer. We need to talk. The bank won't wait. This has gone too far." She locked the screen again without replying. Words had never been the problem. Choices were. At 10 o'clock, Helen arrived at her financial advisor's office. She had postponed this appointment twice in the past because Adam had needed help with another emergency. Not anymore. Her advisor, Benjamin Foster, welcomed her warmly. "It's good to see you again, Helen." "You too." They spent nearly an hour reviewing her investments, retirement accounts, and long-term plans. Benjamin noticed something different about her. "You seem lighter today," Helen smiled. "I finally stopped carrying someone else's burden." She reorganized several accounts, strengthened security on her assets, and confirmed the changes she had made earlier in the week. Everything she and Daniel had worked for would remain protected. When the meeting ended, Benjamin shook her hand. "I think you've made wise decisions. So do I." Leaving the office, Helen walked toward the parking garage. Across the street, she noticed Adam and Melissa sitting outside a small cafe. They looked nothing like the confident couple who had walked into her kitchen 3 days earlier. Adam's shirt was wrinkled. Dark circles framed his tired eyes. Melissa stared anxiously at her phone, tapping the screen over and over. Bills were spread across the cafe table, credit notices, loan statements, past due reminders. Helen watched quietly for a moment. Neither of them noticed her. She didn't feel satisfaction. She felt clarity. Their problems hadn't appeared because she refused to pay. They had existed long before that. She had simply stopped hiding them. Without another glance, Helen continued to her car. By early afternoon, the deadline Melissa had proudly announced had officially arrived. No money had been transferred, no miracle had appeared. Helen drove to the waterfront overlooking the river and spent the afternoon walking along the peaceful promenade. The cool breeze carried away thoughts she had held onto for years. She remembered every birthday gift she had purchased when Adam claimed he couldn't afford one, every mortgage payment she had quietly covered, every vacation she had financed, every excuse she'd believed. Each act had come from love, but somewhere along the way, gratitude had disappeared while expectation had taken its place. That cycle ended today. As the sun began to sink lower, Helen's phone vibrated once again. The missed call count had climbed to 98. One final text from Adam appeared. "Mom, please. We don't know what to do anymore." Helen read it carefully. Then she typed only 2 words. "Too late." She pressed send. It was the only response she had given all week. Returning home, Helen changed into comfortable clothes and opened a bottle of wine Daniel had purchased years earlier for a special occasion. Tonight qualified. She carried her glass onto the back terrace just as the evening sky turned shades of orange and gold. For the first time in years, the house felt entirely hers again. No demands, no guilt, no pressure. Only peace. Around sunset, headlights appeared outside the property. Helen wasn't surprised. Adam's sedan stopped in front of the gate. Melissa rushed out first. She grabbed the iron gate and shook it violently. "Helen," her voice echoed through the quiet neighborhood. "You can't keep ignoring us." Adam remained beside the car, looking defeated rather than angry. Helen stayed seated on the terrace. She spoke calmly across the yard. "I've asked you to leave my property." Melissa pointed toward the house. "We're losing everything. You made that choice." "No, we made mistakes." Helen nodded slowly. "Yes, you did." Adam finally stepped forward. "Mom, please." His voice cracked. "I know we were wrong." Helen looked at him for a long moment. She could hear genuine regret in his voice, but regret didn't erase years of manipulation. "I'm willing to forgive," she said quietly. "But forgiveness isn't the same as financing your life." Before either of them could answer, a security patrol vehicle rolled slowly into the driveway. The officer stepped out politely. "Good evening." He looked toward Adam and Melissa. "The homeowner has requested that you leave." Adam lowered his head. Without arguing, he gently took Melissa's arm. "Let's go." For the first time, she didn't resist. They climbed back into the car and drove away in complete silence. Helen watched the taillights disappear into the darkness. She lifted her wine glass toward the evening sky, not in celebration of their suffering, but in celebration of finally choosing herself. The following morning, Helen awoke to a silence that no longer felt lonely. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom curtains, warming the hardwood floor Daniel had installed with his own hands decades earlier. She stood by the window for several minutes, watching the neighborhood slowly come to life. For years, weekends had meant running errands for Adam and Melissa, babysitting at a moment's notice, paying unexpected bills, or solving problems that somehow always became hers. Today, there were no demands, only possibilities. She brewed a fresh pot of coffee and carried it into the garden. The landscaper she had hired earlier in the week arrived shortly afterward. Together, they walked around the property discussing colorful flower beds, climbing roses, and a small stone path leading to the old oak tree Daniel had loved. For the first time in years, Helen was investing in her own happiness instead of someone else's lifestyle. Later that afternoon, she visited a local bakery and bought a loaf of fresh bread along with 2 cinnamon pastries. As she walked home, several neighbors greeted her warmly. "Good morning, Helen. Beautiful weather today." She smiled at each of them. None of them knew about the painful confrontation with her son, and she preferred it that way. Not every battle needed an audience. Some victories were meant to be enjoyed quietly. 2 weeks passed. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Helen joined a neighborhood book club she had declined for years because she had always been too busy helping Adam. She met old friends for lunch. She enrolled in a weekend photography class. Evenings were no longer interrupted by frantic phone calls requesting money. The silence she once feared had become her greatest comfort. One rainy afternoon, a small package arrived at her front door. Inside were several family keepsakes: Daniel's silver cufflinks, an old photo album, a porcelain music box that had belonged to Helen's grandmother. Folded neatly on top was a handwritten letter. She recognized Adam's handwriting immediately. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I've spent the last 2 weeks thinking about everything you said. I blamed everyone except myself for the choices I made. You spent years helping me, and I treated your kindness like an obligation instead of a gift. Melissa and I have separated. She couldn't accept the life we have now, and maybe I couldn't either until recently. I'm working 2 jobs and slowly paying off what I owe. I finally understand that responsibility can't be borrowed. I'm sending back the things that belong to our family because they were never mine to keep. Whether you answer this letter or not, I'm truly sorry. I hope someday I can earn your trust again. Love." Adam. Helen read the letter twice before carefully folding it. She wasn't ready to erase the past. Trust, once broken, required patience to rebuild. But for the first time in many years, she believed her son might finally be learning the lesson she had hoped life would teach him. A month later, Helen accepted an invitation from her longtime friend Clara Bennett to take a road trip along the Oregon coast. They laughed over seafood dinners, explored quiet seaside towns, and watched waves crash against towering cliffs. One evening, as they sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Clara smiled. "You seem happier than I've seen you in years." Helen gazed toward the endless horizon. "I finally stopped confusing sacrifice with love." Clara reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "You deserve this peace." Helen smiled. "So does everyone who learns to value themselves." By the time autumn turned into winter, Adam contacted her again. This time, he wasn't asking for money. He asked for one of Daniel's old chili recipes. A week later, he called to ask how she had restored the garden. Another week passed before he invited her to have coffee at a small neighborhood cafe. They met. They talked, mostly about Daniel, about childhood memories, about ordinary life. Money was never mentioned. When they parted, Adam hugged his mother. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. It was something far more meaningful. It was a beginning. A relationship built not on financial dependence, but on mutual respect. Months later, Helen stood once again in her flourishing garden. The roses had bloomed beautifully. The stone pathway curved peacefully beneath the old oak tree. Everything around her reflected the life she had chosen to reclaim. She thought about the frightened woman who had once believed saying no would cost her family forever. Instead, saying no had saved the one relationship that still had a chance to heal. She had learned that generosity without boundaries eventually becomes exploitation. Love without respect becomes obligation. And peace begins the moment you stop allowing others to decide your worth. Helen looked toward the evening sky and smiled. Growing older hadn't made her weaker. It had finally given her the courage to protect the life she had spent decades building. Because real family isn't measured by the money you provide. It's measured by the respect that remains when the money is gone.